Hi, welcome back. It's been 1 week since I was discharged from hospital and 13 days since I had my abdominal surgery, removing my large intestine and giving me a stoma, specifically an ileostomy. I thought now would be a good time to sort of go through my first 2 weeks of recovery since surgery, let you know how it's gone and give you any sort of tips and tricks that I think I might have learned along the way. So I thought it'd be best to split this into two sections, physical recovery and mental recovery. And in terms of physical recovery, the first thing to talk about is pain. Immediately after surgery, I was in quite a bit of pain. The first sort of 2 days, you do feel like your stomach has essentially been ripped open, which I guess it has been. What they did to me was they put 2 holes on either side of my stomach, 1 hole in my belly button, and then a sort of 4 to 5 inch incision along my pubic bone, which is where they removed the large intestine. Immediately after surgery, you'll be on quite a lot of painkillers. In the first day or two, I'm not sure how much they do to really cover the pain because the pain's quite high. But you'll be visited by a group of people called the pain team, and they're basically not doctors, not nurses. They turn up wearing suits and they sort of introduce themselves as the pain team. It's kind of like getting a visit from the FBI, and they'll basically figure out what level of pain you're dealing with and give you the right medication to help you get through that. So I was immediately put on morphine and also oxycodone, and then also fentanyl, which is a patch which I'm wearing just now up here, which is a sort of background medication, and then basic painkillers like paracetamol. The pain does wear off, and that might be in large part due to the medication that you're on. But yeah, I noticed after sort of 3-4 days, the actual pain in my stomach wasn't too much unless I was sort of rolling over or moving around. Having said that, in the last few days, the pain's come back a little bit in my sort of lower stomach. And I think this might either be because I've tapered off of the pain-killing medications, or also maybe I'm getting a bit confident in sort of moving around a bit more freely and being slightly more active, going on longer walks and sort of probably being a bit less careful about my stomach. So my plan is for the next few days just to really lay low, lie on the sofa, play FIFA, watch TV, not really do very much, and hopefully that'll allow my stomach to sort of rest and repair a little bit better so I can get back into moving around a bit in the future. On the topic of movement, it's stressed upon you whilst you're in hospital that stuff like getting into and out of bed and getting into and out of chairs is done basically through your arms and through your legs, and that you try not to use your core very much at all. I've been quite careful in doing this, but then also situations like opening a fridge and picking up slightly heavy objects I've maybe been a little bit too confident with. And they do say that you should try in your first 6 weeks not to pick up anything heavier than a full kettle. It's definitely something that's hard not to sort of pay attention to the whole time, making sure that you don't move around too confidently and stretch or lean over or bend over or strain or anything, because these can all cause hernias, and that's kind of the biggest fear that I have at the moment, is that I'll cause myself a hernia in these early stages, which means that I'll have to deal with that for a long period of time, might have to get surgery to correct that in the future. And it will also have a big impact if I want to get back into playing sport, going running, that sort of thing. What I've done to try and mitigate the chances of getting a hernia is, like I said, trying to remember just to be really careful in how I move. I've also bought a few sort of hernia belts. Specifically, they're called stealth belts, and they basically allow you to put your stoma bag into the belt, tie it really tightly around you, and it sort of keeps your core engaged, and just sort of keeps it feeling really tight. I'm also visiting a physiotherapist tomorrow for the first time, and hopefully they'll give me some very, very light exercises to maybe start doing just to retrain my core, get everything strong again so that I can mitigate any chance of getting a hernia. Another thing to think about in physical recovery is you've got to be really careful in what you eat. I was lucky in that my stoma woke up pretty quickly after surgery. I think it woke up actually sort of 5 hours after surgery. And by that I mean it just started producing output, and output is a pretty weird surgical clinical word used for just poo. So basically my stoma just started pooing pretty quickly, which meant that I could start eating pretty quickly. And the day after surgery, I think for lunch I had custard and yogurt, and then later on I tried to have a sandwich. That was a bit too heavy for me, so made me feel a bit ill. But I do think that evening I had shepherd's pie or something. And then slowly as the days went on, I started eating more solid foods. But what the nurses and doctors in hospital will tell you is in the first 6 weeks after surgery to try and eat a low fiber, low residue diet. And what this basically is a diet that's really low in fibrous foods, so vegetables, nuts, fruits, seeds, but you get all your calories from sort of meat and just beige carbohydrates like potatoes, pastas, breads, porridge. So for me, it's a perfect diet. Like, I find it really tasty. The reason they tell you to stay on this diet is because at first your stoma is obviously quite swollen still, quite angry looking. It might not be working as well as it could be in the early stages. And by avoiding those fibrous foods, you mitigate the chances of any blockages happening. And blockages are basically when foods, specifically like nuts and seeds and fibrous vegetables, get stuck in your stoma and causes a big sort of backlog. It can cause damage to your intestine and can just be really uncomfortable. So luckily, I've not yet run into any problems with that. But it's definitely something that maybe in a few weeks' time I'll start looking at introducing slightly more interesting foods. What you'll notice immediately after you wake up is when your stoma does start working, the consistency of the output will be kind of weird. For me, it was basically just stomach bile, so it looked like really wet, watery grass essentially for a day or two. And then I think when I started eating food, and specifically more solid, thickening foods, my output became much more thick itself, and started looking more like general poo. What you'll also notice is that as you start eating more foods and as time goes on, your output will be less constant, and mine's sort of gotten into a bit of a pattern now where it seems to sort of start outputting a few hours after I eat a meal and then stopping for a few hours, and then I'll eat a meal and it will output a few hours later again. This is actually really helpful because it means that my bag changes are more consistent. They're more consistent times every day. And it means I can sort of plan stuff a little bit better. It also means I'm just not changing it nearly as regularly. In the first few days after surgery, I was probably changing my bag 6, 7, 8 times a day, and then 2 or 3 times throughout the night. At the moment, I seem to be changing it 5-ish times a day, probably twice at night as well. But I've been told that this will just sort of settle down more over the next few weeks. I think it's really important in your physical recovery to try and get up and moving as soon as you can. And the nurses at hospital will definitely try and get you up for a walk or up to have a shower on the first day after surgery. As difficult as it might seem, I really recommend doing it. I managed to get up for sort of a 30-second walk and have a shower and actually change my bag on my own on the first day. So I think if you can throw yourself into that stuff, provided you're not in overwhelming amount of pain, I think it is really good for your physical recovery. It sort of helps your body get back into moving, and it also just helps you sort of get used to moving around with this new body that you're going to have. On the topic of bag changes, at first I was changing it every day. I then moved to changing it twice a day in the morning and evening just to get the practice in. But then having spoken to the stoma nurses, they said that changing it too often can cause skin irritation, and that I should try and change it once a day or once every 2 days. So I've moved to changing it once every day, and sometimes I'm doing it once every sort of 36 hours. And hopefully I can just carry on stretching that out to once every 2 days. Like I said earlier, at first the stoma will be quite big, angry and red looking. If I've got any photos of the stoma from the sort of first few days after surgery, I'll maybe throw them up now. Be warned, it's not a pretty sight. Look away if you're sort of not into that sort of stuff. And I might also throw up a picture of the stoma as it's looking now. I think it's shrunk quite a little bit. You can tell me if you think the same. So other than this sort of all these physical issues you've got to look at with recovery, I think actually most importantly is mental. And by that I mean it's just sort of coming to terms with your new life with this strange intestine sticking out next to your belly button, pulsing like a big red slug and shitting at its own accord and farting at its own accord and doing its own thing. At first, it's a pretty weird experience. I remember the day after surgery, sitting in my bed, looking down and watching this thing just doing its own business and being pretty scared, pretty worried that maybe I'd made the wrong decision to elect for surgery. Maybe I could have tried more medical options, and getting myself in quite a bad headspace. However, since then, I've actually just become fascinated by it, and I find it really interesting just to watch. And I've also realised that this is the first 2 weeks in years that I've not felt really pretty ill for most of every day, and that's because of the stoma. That's because the stoma's allowed me to feel good, and I think having this sort of appreciation and this sort of friendliness towards the stoma has allowed me to deal with, also the difficult times that have come in these first 2 weeks, like when I'm changing my bag and it just decides to shit on the floor, or when I'm talking to someone and my stoma just all of a sudden decides to start farting and making noises. So there are plenty of problems that obviously come with having the stoma, but I think if you have this appreciative and friendly outlook towards the stoma and towards what it's doing for you in general, it's definitely helped with my sort of mental recovery and just being able to adapt and sort of happy to live with it. So what I'll do is I'll check back in a few weeks' time. I'll update you on how the physio's gone. I might put together a video on the exercises the physio gives me. I'll also update you on the diet, any changes I'm making to the diet, and I might put together a sort of what I eat to a day on this sort of diet video for you. I know that people tend to like those sort of things. And like I said, if you know anyone who's got IBD, that's Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, who you think could get some value from any of these videos, then please share this with them. If this can help one person, then it's worth making these videos. And I know that these sort of things helped me when I was first diagnosed and still help me now.